Animal Antics, written and told by Kiefer Adams. One morning, Emily, Oliver and Thomas were resting at Wellsworth Station when the Fat Controller arrived. "Good morning, sir," said Oliver. "You look flustered." "There's been an emergency," said the Fat Controller. "The Sodor Wildlife Park has lost most of its animals. They escaped during last night." "That's awful," said Emily. "Can we help?" "I'm sure you can," replied the Fat Controller. He quickly turned to Thomas. "Janet, the off-road vehicle that works at the park, would like you to go and find most of the animals." "Yes, sir," said Thomas. He then turned back to Oliver and Emily. "Any engines you find, tell them about the situation and make sure they have trucks at the ready if any of the animals are spotted." "Count on us, sir," said Oliver confidently. The Fat Controller beamed. "Don't let me down," he said, and he hurried away. "Those poor animals," said Emily. "Will we find them?" "Of course we will," said Thomas. "We will not let the Fat Controller down." And he hurried away to meet Janet. But Oliver and Emily were slightly nervous about the whole ordeal. Before long, all of the Fat Controller's engines were told to keep an eye out for the missing animals. James was up on the main line delivering fruit and vegetables to market. He was just passing a small farm when he was surprised to find a large Asian elephant grazing nearby. "Goodness me!" James exclaimed, and he came to a slow stop. The elephant slowly turned and trumpeted a greeting. It was lucky for James that there was an empty cattle truck, as he had just delivered sheep to market on his previous run. "We'll take the elephant in that and bring it back to the park," said his driver. "Can't we just leave it here?" groaned James, but he knew they couldn't. The elephant was soon in the cattle truck, coaxed by the driver's bunch of bananas, and James took the animal back to the park. There were still more animals to find. All over the island of Sodor, the engines were getting surprises here, there and everywhere. Edward was bringing trucks of coal up from the top station when he saw a giant hippopotamus. It was looking for mud to wallow in. Edward's crew were able to contact the Sodor Wildlife Park, and before long, a lorry was called up to collect the hippo. Percy, on the other hand, got a big surprise at Dryall Station when two zebras galloped around the station yard. A horse box was soon called to collect the zebras. Meanwhile, Oliver was just telling Toad about the ordeal that they were facing when Toad felt something flutter against his frames.
"I don't like the feel of that, Mr. Oliver,"
he quivered. Oliver was just about to perk up when he was stunned to see two ostriches. They were looking for something to eat. "Oh dear," Oliver exclaimed. "That won't do." It was lucky that there was an open truck in the yard. Oliver and Toad collected it and headed up to the park. But the biggest surprise of all came from Emily. She had been worried all morning about the animals, and the last thing she didn't expect was a giraffe walking slowly down the line. "Goodness," she cried. Luckily, Emily's crew were able to contact the wildlife park, who were able to collect the giraffe and take it back to the park after Emily had managed to coax it down the line to an open area where it could be collected safely. Further up the line, Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle were helping Janet, the park's off-road vehicle, find more of the animals. "I hope we find them all by sundown," she said worriedly. "I don't want the park to close with no animals in it." "We'll find them," said Thomas. "Don't you worry." They were just passing through Henry's forest when... "Eek!" cried Annie and Clarabelle. "Get it off! Get it off!" "Get what off?" asked Thomas. But he then felt something pitter-patter across his cab roof. The next thing he knew, and to Janet's surprise, 6 monkeys dropped down from the trees and started walking across Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle's roofs. One monkey, bigger than the rest, walked towards Janet. she noticed a bunch of keys wrapped round its tail. "Oh, you little beggar," she exclaimed. "That's how all the animals escaped." Thomas was quite surprised at this. "How are we going to get them back to the park?" he asked. "We'll have to use your coaches," said Janet. "You will certainly not," said Annie. "We're not carrying monkeys," snapped Clarabelle. "Janet's right," said Thomas. "There's no other way we can take them back to the park." And so it was arranged. Thomas's driver and fireman and Janet's owner carefully mounted the monkeys into Annie and Clarabelle. And very carefully, Thomas took them back to the park, where Janet would hope that the rest of the animals had been recovered. "Oh, that's a relief," Janet told Thomas later on. "We're just missing one animal now. I'll have Percy go and find it." Meanwhile, Devious Diesel was sulking. He was helping to build a new suspension bridge. He had heard about the animals' escape, but was worried he'd encounter one himself. At that moment, Diesel heard rustling in the bushes nearby. "Nice try, Thomas," he scowled. "You can't fool me with your tricks." But instead of a whistle, Diesel heard a respond in reply. The next thing he knew, a large rhinoceros charged out of the bushes. It galloped across the tracks and disappeared within moments. Diesel was rather shaken up. By the time Percy arrived, Diesel had gone green, but he was able to point Percy in the right direction of the rhino. Percy and the keeper tracked it down half a mile down the line. It was safely loaded and brought back to the park. Most of the animals, such as lions and tigers, had thankfully not escaped, and Janet was pleased that all the animals were safe and sound back at the wildlife park. Later that evening, Thomas and Emily were chatting to Janet when the Fat Controller arrived. "Well done to you all," he congratulated. "I'm very proud of your work today. All the animals have been safely returned to the park." "I couldn't have done it without your engines, sir," said Janet. "They were absolutely splendid." "We're very happy to help," said Thomas. The Fat Controller was very pleased. Janet soon headed back to the wildlife park. "What a day!" Emily exclaimed. "I hope we'll never get to do anything like that again." "I agree," replied Thomas. "I've had enough monkeying around for one whole day." Emily and Thomas laughed and headed back home to the comforts of Tidmouth Sheds.